There we go. Hopefully, we have audio and video capability. We're going to pause for notice from all those of you out there in the bio digital internet realm. Let me know if you can hear me. And I'm pretty sure we have full audio connectivity. But yeah, let me know. There we go. What's up, Queen Victor? How's it going? Yes, it's true. We have officially crossed the blood-brain barrier. We made it through, what was it, Stargate 10 and the mass relay outside of our solar system. So, we've passed through all the important barriers. We were able to, make it through we got our paperwork approved for today's live stream. And I want to say welcome, greetings, everyone. We are getting close. We're getting close to the end of 2025. It's been quite a journey, but it's good to see everybody. We're going to put comments on the screen. How do we do that? How do we put comments on the screen before we get started here? Boom, there it is. Anyway, it's good to see you guys. Let me know if we have any questions before we begin. We're going to kind of jump in a little bit sooner this time to our reading journey, because let me just show you what we're working with. For those of you guys that are tuning in now, whether it be for the live stream or in the future, we're working our way through this massive body of strange work that we released in June of 2024. And so far we've covered like the first chapter. So we've read like we've read like this much of it, you guys. Oh my God, this is probably this. You got strap in. This is going to be going on for probably the next 6 months, I would imagine, at the rate we're going. But at the same time, it feels kind of appropriate. And so, just to say it officially, thank you for those of you guys that have been coming back once again for these readings, for this sort of question and answer. I call it the weirdest book club that there ever has been, although I'm pretty sure there's been weirder ones. But in terms of this sort of soul group or community, it's probably one of the stranger ones. But anyway, it's good to see you guys. Let us know if you can in the chat what part of the world you're in. We have a small group of dedicated people that have shown up here today, and I'm just curious where we are. We know Queen Victor's out there in the wilds of Scotland, but I'm just curious, where's everybody at? And anyway, we'll keep going. That said, we don't have any official announcements for today. Like I said, the year's nearly over. Not that that means anything, but um, it's been a very, very interesting time period for each of us. I think that it's safe to say that 2025 showed every single person where they did not have their shit together in their life. You know what I mean? It was like, hey, let me point out these multiple areas to you that are fundamentally not working anymore, no longer serving you, are incompatible with your current path and future paths, and let's just shove them in your face. And it was a very wild journey of that. And now here we are today. And I think we're kind of on the verge or beginning a stage of what some may call a revealing of certain illusions, or we're passing through a gateway of illusionary energy that has been cast upon the hearts and minds of certain people. And in some ways it could be really huge. It could signal, a massive realization or epiphanies for some of us out there. It could also clear up a lot of weird shit in our lives where we realize that, and this is never a fun thing to do, we inevitably realize how many things in our lives that we had wrong, right? The whole time where you're like, oh, I realized I had that whole thing reversed this entire time. I think we're kind of in a season right now, literally, maybe the month of December and past that, where a lot of these things are going to be revealed. The illusionary energies or things that we've been holding in front of ourselves every day, the ideas, the fragments of, we could even say, shared reality that are no longer compatible with our well-being. But anyway, we're going to limit the early show rant today, and we're going to do some reading here in a moment. But anyway, let me check your comments. And yeah, it's good to see everybody. Okay, we got some people from Michigan. What's going on? Nothing to find. 9009 from Michigan. Yeah, nice. Thank you for joining us. Where else? I want to see some locations. Okay, we got Laura Roach out there in Oregon. What's up? Good. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us. We got Kat L in Connecticut. Well, I always feel like Connecticut is kind of one of the forgotten states. And I don't mean for good reasons or bad reasons. I'm not trying to, say anything good or bad about it, but like Connecticut is one of those places that you just never really hear about, right? You just don't. It's just like, oh, oh yeah, I forgot there was Connecticut over there doing its thing somewhere. I would imagine that if you showed what is it, like, a bunch of Gen Z kids, like, a map, without any names on it and say, "Show me where Connecticut is." They'll be like, you know what I mean? They'll point somewhere near, like, California, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, what's up, Jose? New Jersey? Nice, cool. My only experiences in New Jersey were few, and everyone said it was a horrible place, but I actually enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. Chicago, what's happening? We got Utah. Utah was definitely another location that I have very fond memories of. I would say all the way back in the early 2000s when I was playing in a band and we went on tour. Every time we went through Utah, there was a good experience there. Generally good experiences. It was yeah, it was interesting. What's up, Sally Forth? Pittsburgh, I feel ya. Okay. Pittsburgh is one I had a little bit of experience with Pittsburgh. But anyway, thank you. Thanks for letting us know your current location. We'll be sure to turn that into the proper authorities. But oh, nice. What's up, Aurora Diamond Hearts? Playing this on 3 times speed. Whoa, nice. Okay, so I'm talking really, really fast right now. That's a good one. I respect that. I also do that on a lot of shows where I'll be like, "Oh my god, what did I miss? I have to hurry up." Yeah, I feel you. The good news is you'll eventually get to this point right now and you'll realize like, "Oh, yeah, he hasn't really said anything at all." Right? It's okay. It's okay. Anyway, we're gonna go ahead and jump in here today. We're going to dive directly into reading. For those of you guys that find this in the future, we are reading through the book entitled, I'll just show it again. I don't know why we're stalling before we're beginning, but we're reading Remember Your Mission. What if you're not crazy? What if you're psychic? A good option right now for those of you guys that are looking for sort of an easy path toward understanding the bizarreness of certain elements of just what it looks like and what it sounds like and what it feels like when you go through what many people call a psychic awakening, which is a really big new age term, depending on who you follow. The term, psychic awakening or psychic activation or intuitive, awakening, or, depending on what kind of friend group you're in, you might, use psionic, in place of that. It is ultimately kind of the story of what that process looked like for me, and really, what I learned out of it, what we took from it, and ultimately, I would say the modality and the work that I've carried forward since. And so, if you're watching this, you'll already know that. But for those of you guys that are just rolling in, that's really what we're doing. We're just kind of reading through this. And so we're going to be pausing. Don't worry. We're going to pause once again. And so I will say this for the 100th time, put any of your questions in the chat. It's really, really helpful if you put question like in all caps, because that's what I'm going to be looking for when we go back to questions. So let me know if you have any questions before we begin. Okay, so she's caught up. That's a good sign. What's going on? Good to see everybody here. Thank you for joining us on this strange. What day is it? Can anyone tell me what day? Oh, it's Wednesday. Okay. That's a sad thing when you don't know what day it is, right? Or is that a good thing when time kind of all blends into one like continuous bizarre experience where you're like, what day is it? It's I guess it could be worse, right? What's up, Andromedan? We need an Andromedan emoji. I would actually, I am in approval of that. I'm in approval of an Andromedan emoji. Send us like a headshot and we can turn it into like a thumbnail, and it will actually be you. But anyway, Robin Lane gets it. Time is malleable. I absolutely agree. I think one of the early stage kind of discoveries that I I wouldn't call it necessarily a discovery. Maybe it was an observation, and I'm not even trying to say that it was necessarily exactly the way that it is, but oddly enough, it was during the stage that we've been talking about within, I guess, the first couple chapters of this book, which is really, kind of a long-winded yet somewhat limited breakdown of the early weird experiences that I had. And during those early days, there was these moments in which I could like tune in, like almost, I mean, it sounds crazy, like a radio station to certain wavelengths or certain, it was almost like voices, or in some cases even weird sounds that sort of had this sort of metallic ringing that were sort of presence. I remember noticing them alongside cars. I remember noticing them alongside buildings. If I would allow myself to breathe in a certain way and let kind of something go, kind of like, it's almost like structures had their own sort of vibration. But getting back to the point of it, the comment about time, that within all the weirdness of those early days experiences, one of the things that I believe I was shown or maybe informed of was that time is not only is it incredibly malleable, which we all know, but it actually has this consciousness of its own. And some would say that there's a sentience to time, and that there was a great breakdown in the ways in which we had agreed to experience it for third density bodies, meaning that we agreed to only be able to experience one fragment of a certain living thing or a certain wavelength or a frequency, because that was just part of the duality of the human experience. But at that stage, I was being shown that time was something that was essentially alive and that was living with us alongside everything within this realm that we chose to incarnate into. And I think a lot of people that kind of follow the sort of energy and the subject matter of this channel will probably be like, yeah, yeah, that feels kind of sort of right. I think everyone will have their own kind of version of it. But for me, it was just an early stage understanding that I was like, this is actually a real thing. And it's funny because I think during those early days of this sort of kundalini explosion in my body, it was as if time would slow down, time would speed up. It was as if I would kind of lose an entire day within moments, which, sounds like a trite kind of statement in its own way, but other people have experienced such things as well. And so, anyway, we'll keep rolling. We're going to start reading here in a second. I don't see any specific questions here. Cat L gets it. Pretty much the same thing. It's all good. Yeah. Right. Or maybe you're talking about the cat, the cat. You're talking about Wednesday, name for your. I just grabbed like your comment and like applied it to my statement. So I realized you guys were having a side conversation in the chat. So thank you for. I just kind of took you out of context, but it was useful. So anyway, okay. So before I get off on a major rant, where are we? For those of you guys that choose to follow along, we are at page 39. And to kind of recap where we were in last week's exciting episode, we were talking a little bit right as we closed about what I believe to be fragments of the soul unbraiding or the walk-in process, which was something that was shown to me early on as I was going through this experience. And it was very much l- very authentic from the perspective that up until July of 2015, I was one version of myself. And every now and then I get people that kind of blow in from, the distant past. And, they kind of trip out on how different it is now. I even look a lot different. It was a very profound shift. And when I look back upon that, let's say even if it wasn't a walk-in, let's say even if it wasn't some, other energy or the unraveling of, pieces of soul identity within the body. Let's say if there was nothing new agey or sort of multi-dimensional wrapped up in all of it, it almost doesn't matter because it was as if in July of 2015, a switch just turned on and one turned off. And it's hard to kind of look back on that from an observational perspective, it's hard to look back on that and realize like that's a thing that actually happens because we're trained as humans to think that it doesn't. But I mean, it was like I began to switch into a different person overnight. And anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But we're gonna pick it up from yeah, we're gonna pick it up from page 39. And I will pause momentarily. We'll check for your comments, but feel free to join along with me in your own way or just listen. But here we go. It really didn't matter which label I chose to apply to myself. Every single person in my life could tell something was changing at a shocking pace. Within 3 months of the original crown chakra opening experience, I had been successful in shedding a series of medications that I'd been taking for around 8 years at that point. I somehow lost around 35 pounds during that time and even felt guided to do strange things like write my name differently. I did actually speak differently. I even tried writing with my right hand for a brief time. That's literally true. I'm very, very left-handed. Some of it stuck, and some of it was a series of symbolic gestures I felt I needed to go through, thinking it was part of me learning to be something new. It's still funny because in the midst of it all, I still had no idea I had a psychic ability or anything other than a freak occurrence in my life. I mean, there were signs, but I had never seen the real version of it, so everything felt vague and unknowable, despite all the activity going on inside me. After attending the oneness groups for around 6 months, I began to pick up all kinds of new data. And I'll pause there first off and just kind of recap. When I say the oneness groups, for those of you guys that may or may not have been around last week, right after I had this sort of energetic explosion within the body, ultimately I kind of went back to the people that I believed kind of facilitated it. And it was really just this sort of pseudo Eastern meditation kind of spiritualist group slash cult, and they had called themselves, oneness at the time, which is such a like, like now when you look at it, like 8 years later, it's so like, that's perfect for 2015, it's like perfect. It fits right in with the energy of that time. Nowadays we're like, yeah, sure. But at the time it was a somewhat of a relevant label. But after attending the oneness groups for around 6 months, I had begun to pick up all kinds of new data. It was a crash course in overhearing fragments of talk about chakras, energy, kundalini, and all kinds of new spiritual terms I didn't really understand, to tell you guys the truth. I really didn't. This was the first time I was really being exposed to these things. I never took a class in any of it, and I was often too afraid to ask questions because I started to see shades of resentment in the eyes of others in the group, as well as a weird type of exclusion I would experience after being truly open with people. I think a lot of us, that would follow this channel have had those experiences in life where you're like, you finally get real and the real version of you comes out, and everyone's like, they're just like, you're crazy. And you're like, yeah, I guess I am. But and so, it was starting to get a little bit weird. Instead, I would go home later and just look up terms, maybe watch a few minutes of someone's video on YouTube, but not much more. Still to this very day, I have never had any formal instruction in energy body mechanics, energy healing, or psychic development. That is absolutely 100% true, which is that'll be a fun one for all those of you that have been taking our classes. There's been hundreds over the years. Also, let me say it again. I have never had any formal instruction in energy body mechanics, energy healing, or psychic development. Boom. It was as if that original choir of voices began to fill in the blanks, and I would have vast open-ended conversations with some kind of energy in my head that had solidified since the original explosions of applause and talking into a steady, slow current of call and response type communication that would often be right there when I would angle my thoughts inward, just as I did in the early days of theta experimentation. I will also pause here and say this was around the time when I began to discover the left hand, at least for me, the left hand access point or the left side access point. We can talk more about that later. I've touched upon it in other shows and lives and whatnot, but we all have access points. We all have access points, directions through which you can focus or turn your attention to have a greater impact or a greater receptivity to what we might call messages from spirit. And this was the first time in which I began to experiment with such things. And so on the day at the, or excuse me, one day at the close of one of our meditations in that dingy little room in Golden Hill, I overheard a couple people mention a name. This is a fun part of the book. I overheard a couple people mention a name in the midst of a conversation I knew nothing about. Sharadama, that was the name. For real. That's her real name, by the way. I don't know why, but immediately I asked, Sharada who? I did, seriously. I really didn't know why I was asking that, but for some reason the name hit me and I reacted nearly involuntarily. It turns out Sharadama was a woman from India who ran a satsang group. For those who don't know, the simplest way to describe it is kind of like one of those scenes you've seen in a movie where some Eastern guru type person comes in, gives a group of spiritual teachings of some sort, and then takes people through some kind of meditation or spiritual process or chanting or, some weird shit. And there was lots of chanting, ohms, and all kinds of Sanskrit mantras that seemed to thoroughly confuse me from day one. I awkwardly asked if I could go to her group with them. And as I recall, I needed to meet her prior to that, which was weird. You had to get like approval to literally go to this. It seemed kind of exclusive, but I felt this strange burning inside me that made me willing to try. That very weekend, I attended a completely different group meditation. And, this was at a stage of my life where I was going to like group meditations like every weekend, literally. I was just going like full, like head first into it. And honestly, it was one of the only things that kept me grounded. It really kept me present. But anyway, that very weekend, I attended a completely different group meditation with two of the women who I had overheard talking about Sharadama. And sure enough, this is weird because it was not a normal thing, but sure enough, she was sitting there as we walked in the room. It's funny looking back now because that lady didn't go anywhere with anyone unless there was a very distinct reason. I didn't realize that at the time, and I will pause here to say that is 100% true. I did get to know this person later on, and they didn't go to anyone's anything anywhere at that time. I'm assuming this woman's still alive. I'm very far away from the group of people at this stage of my life, but I didn't realize that that was a big deal. I had no idea how profound and rare it was to run into this person like this. It had not been planned, and the woman brought me, said, "Oh, look, she's here. What do you know?" Sharadama was a tiny little Indian woman, about 5 feet tall in total, maybe even smaller. She seemed to be in her late 50s around that time, but that's pure speculation. She was wearing one of those orangish red robes, just like the first Reiki healer that I had been led to at the White Wall at Seaport Village many months earlier. Her eyes seemed both darkly intense and full of light in a way that made me a little intimidated. After the meditation that day, which was honestly completely diluted and chaotic, she came walking up to me with one of the women who had brought me there and said something that I had never heard before in my entire life. She shook my hand and just looked at me for a moment. And I'll pause there to say I felt uncomfortable. I remember shaking this woman's hand and she was just like, you know, uncomfortably long period of eye contact. She just shook my hand and looked at me for a moment. Then she suddenly said in a very dry and matter of fact way that we had an agreement from a past life for her to bring me to the self. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I was shocked. We knew each other in a past life, I said. What were we doing? Who was I? She just smiled and said something about how my job is in the here and now, The only thing that mattered was who I was becoming, and she offered to call me in a few days to talk about it. I gave her my phone number and was surprised that she wanted to know where I lived as well, what my address was even. It seemed an odd thing to ask for, but I felt calm in her presence and was drawn to her in a way that I had never known. It was like it was nothing weird at all. It was like I wanted to hear her voice for some reason. Didn't really matter what she was saying. I will pause there to say that that is honestly one of the best ways that I could describe it. Imagine having that experience where you're sort of bouncing around the world, kind of, identityless, going through this weird sort of Kundalini awakening slash psychic explosion thing. And at that stage of my life, I was just going to group meditations, and there was usually a few like older, like grandmotherly type women there that I recognized from this oneness group, and they were kind, and I would just sit with them. And so it was weird the way things had kind of been unfolding for me. And I think in only looking back on it now can I see how sort of orchestrated a lot of that was, because as I got to know this woman, it was very uncommon that you would find her out in public. It was like, what? How? Okay. But here's where it got weird. About 2 weeks later, she called me. This is me getting back to the text here. About 2 weeks later, she called me and we had a strange talk that I can't seem to remember very much of. She talked about the self, quote unquote, the true version of me that was returning to this earth plane, and how I needed to do nothing but truly be me. Only first I had to find out who I really was. She said I would be entering a stage of my life that I could not understand right now, and that everything I ever needed would be given to me if I followed a certain path of non attachment. Some of you guys have heard that line before. It seemed a little contradictory in places, but I didn't care, and I barely understood any of it to begin with. That's the literal truth. I was like, okay, just like a kid, like, yeah, yeah, all right, I'll do it. I mean, really, that's where I was at. You know what I mean? It was that is literally where I was at. Anyway, getting back to it, it seemed a little contradictory in places, but I didn't care and barely understood any of it to begin with. She talked about how one day, this is where it got weird. She talked about how one day I would have a group like hers and a whole bunch of other things that, in hindsight, have actually come to pass in many varying ways. After a short talking to from Sharadama, she said it was time to do our meditation and suddenly hung up the phone. It was a little strange to me. I didn't know if it was a meditation we did together, separately, or even what to do. Prior to hanging up, she just said something like, I will see you soon. Just be in silence and let go. And I'll mention, I really didn't know what I was like, what? Okay. You know what I mean? I was like a child in this. A few minutes later, a few moments later, excuse me, I just leaned back on the bed I was sitting on with my head against the wall. My mind wandered for a few moments, and then I remember feeling something that felt like the color and texture of ivory. It felt strong, yet soft at the same time, pure white and flowing with my breath. At that very moment, and I felt and saw energy that looked like light at the bottom of a swimming pool around me. And the very next thing I knew, it was exactly 1 hour later, and I was awakening from what was absolutely the deepest state of meditation I had ever experienced. It was like I actually left this plane of existence. I don't know any other way to describe it. She would talk to me for a bit, tell me to lay down, and then some kind of energy would come in that would take me so far and so deeply into a place that I had no words or description for. It was pure nothingness, pure spirit. There were no thoughts, no communication. It was the single deepest experience I had ever had up until that point in my life, and it changed me. From that day forward, I began to attend Sharadama's satsang group every other week. It was on Sundays at 2 p.m. Sometimes even weekly if there was a gathering for about a year and a half straight, I would say. Maybe a little bit less. Maybe a little bit less, a year and a half. There was always a little talk she would give, a bit of chanting Sanskrit mantras, and then a deep meditation that would cause literally everyone. I mean, I don't know what everyone else went through, looking back on it. You know what I mean? I really don't know. But we would do this deep meditation that would cause literally everyone to completely leave their bodies, or at least that's what I experienced. And during that period, she would call me every 2 weeks like clockwork, literally straight up on the phone. You know how weird that is these days, right? Where you're like, what? We're talking on the phone? What? Wait, what do you mean? You're going to call me? What? No, you know what I mean? It's like every 2 weeks, like clockwork, she would call me, talk to me a bit before hanging up, and then sending me into the deepest state of nothingness I could possibly imagine over and over again. It never varied. It never got diluted. It was the single most powerful form of energy I had ever experienced. And during our individual encounters, at least, it was nearly the most important thing I had ever done. Sharadama never asked me for a single dollar. She never demanded anything of me. She was a devotee of the Hindu goddess Kali Ma and a follower of some form of non-dual spirituality that I never understood, to be totally honest with you. I just didn't really get it. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, just like a kid, like, yeah, if you say so. Most of the time starting to cry, at the same time. But she claimed her job in part was to not only bring me to the self, but to also help in cutting off the head of the previous versions of me, just like the giant image of Kali that hung behind her. To some, that might be a gruesome or questionable way to put it, but she was very lighthearted about it all. She never took herself too seriously, and it was literally true. An older version of me had to die, in a sense, so a new version could come in. Once again, lending credence to the idea of the walk in or soul unbraiding process. I had begun to slowly fade out of the oneness groups, which made sense as I felt myself progressing in some way, but it was a long process. And in truth, I stayed a member of both groups during that time period of 2015 up until spring of 2017 before an even greater change came upon me. In 2016, during the midst of all of the bewildering energy, meditation groups, and intensity of adjusting to whatever it was that happened in my life, I discovered the practice of Qigong. It came to me through a person I had met synchronistically that summer at get ready for this part. This is fun. I had met synchronistically that summer at a secret space program conference in Mount Shasta, California, a man by the name of Eric Rains, who had a very positive effect on me in this life. He's still out there doing this work. He was the first example I ever saw of a person who had successfully taken on the path of a professional energetic practitioner. And so I'm gonna pause there because we're gonna get into some kind of a little bit of super diluted vanilla SSP talk, a little bit of like, energy work stuff in a second, but I'm going to pause for questions and comments. Thank you to everyone that's hanging out. Um, Thank you, Aurora Diamond Heart, for hanging out. Yep, Kali Ma. Yeah, totally. She had this poster. It was like with this super ornate, um, like frame around it. It was like just this crazy, fucking huge, gigantic, like 5 foot tall painting of Kali Ma that they hung up, like behind her. And it was literally, where she's like with the knife, like cutting off dudes' heads, you know what I mean? And I didn't know anything about it. I was like, okay, yeah, yeah, it was like, sure, I didn't know any better or any worse. And, in all reality, I think it was a force that really came into my life and did exactly that. You know what I mean? Slaughtered the other aspects, the dead versions of myself. It really had a profound effect on me. Anyway, Thanks for your comments, you guys. Nothing to find says America has become a pay to play social scene where the juice is rarely worth a squeeze. Big bummer. Ain't that the truth, man? Oh, Lord. I feel you on that one. Girl on her bong says, same. I don't belong anywhere either. Don't worry. I feel you on that one. I feel you on that one. Feel you. Oh, here we go. Nothing to find. Matthew experimented with writing as a righty, but then switched back to being a natural lefty the way God intended. You're damn right I did. But I was, I don't know if this was a thing they did for other Generation X people. I know that I've heard they did this for the previous generations. I'm pretty sure they don't do it now. But when I was in like grades, I would say like 2 and 3, which is as I recall doing a lot of writing. Or I think it was second grade, really. Anyway, it doesn't matter what grade it was. As a kid, I remember trying to write with my left hand because it was natural, and the teachers would come along and take the pen or pencil out of my left hand and put it in the right hand, and they forced me for a while to try to write with my right hand. I didn't know why. I was like, okay, as a kid, you're like, and eventually I just was like, yeah, I'm left-handed, dude, and everybody gave up. But yeah, I did for a time. I was very, very dedicated to completely reversing or greatly altering every pathway of behavior, every fragment of identity that I had begun to identify as just kind of old and worn and toxified, and it was like all that stuff had to be changed in some weird way. And I'm not saying that's what anyone else needs to do, because it's kind of extreme. But I think, well, not think, I mean, that is clearly that's what I had to do. That's the way it was meant to go for me. But anyway, we're gonna keep going, you guys. Let's get back to it. Sally Force says, do y'all believe in the twin flames thing, or is that BS? I think the way it's presented for a lot of us within the so-called spiritual communities is very much a distorted kind of thought form that everyone passes around. I think what you'll find is that we have many so-called twin flames and many soulmates, that you've lived so many different lives and been with so many people. There's certain ones that are really going to vibe with you, and your vibration is going to attract each other in this life. And there's ones that you're going to have unfinished business with as well. And there's a host of many different beings. I did hear somebody say this years ago. They were like, once you get past the age of, like, I don't remember, it was either 40s or 50s, so I'm kind of altering this quote here, but they were like, after you get past a certain stage in your life, all of the meaningful relationship encounters in any form are all people that you've done this with before. It's like those are the immediate people who are back in your life from other go rounds, and one form or another. And I'm not saying that's true, because everyone thinks they know, right? But I do think it's a highly distorted kind of thing within the spiritual community. So it's really, I think it's damaging to a lot of people, because I think it kind of propagates the idea that we will never be whole without something other than ourselves, and we could dive farther into it, but it's a conversation for another time. We're going to get back to it. Here's something about American Dad. American Dad had a whole episode about Francine being a natural lefty, and nuns in school used to slap her hand for writing with it. Yes, they didn't slap me, but they came over and she literally like took my hand and took the pencil out and like put it in my hand, and like literally stuck it in my finger, like they would like wrap my hand around it. Imagine this is a pen, and then force me to write. And I remember just being like, like as a little kid, you're like, okay, but I also think it was because I went to kind of one of those hardcore Christian schools for a while, so that could also have been it. But anyway, let's get back to the story here, guys. So where we were talking about The very first conference that I ever went to was 2016. It was the initial secret space program conference put on by Rob Potter. Rest in peace, Rob Potter, who did die, I think, either this year or the year prior to us, maybe in 2024. But back in 2016, he put on back-to-back conferences. I think there was one the year that year and one the year after, or something along those lines, where a bunch of people kind of made initial gatherings out to kind of just do a secret space program conference. Corey Good was there, and Tony Rodriguez was there, for the first time. A bunch of people had all encountered each other for the very first time at this one event. It was a bigger deal than I think anyone there realized, because it's just highly, highly interesting. Michael Salla was there. All of those sort of, kind of toxically cool, disclosure influencer people before they were cool. You know what I mean? It was that stage where you could still talk to people without a weird, cult of personality. But anyway, that's where I encountered where I met Eric Rains, who during that conference gave me the first ever energy clearing that I had ever had. And so I'm going to get back to this. And this is me kind of skipping over a massive chapter in my life of the early days of kind of getting pulled into that whole social group and that whole scene. And, in the years after this, getting much, much closer into the whole Corey Good kind of like weird cold. It was really the entry point. It was the sparking point for all of those things, at least in my life. And I know a lot of other people that were there. But anyway, Eric Rains was the first example I ever saw of a person who had successfully taken on the path of a professional energetic practitioner. We had both been drawn in by the mystique of understanding secret government projects and military space programs that had been supposedly hidden from the public for decades, things which we all take now as being literally real and very accepted. At that time in 2016, it was still very, very fresh. It was very, very unknown. For some in our soul group, that was the year when many of the so-called first wave of SSP whistleblowers came into the public eye. I'll pause there and say it wasn't the beginning of that had been going on for decades. It was just the beginning stage in which people started to gain a lot more popularity around it. And so it wasn't like it wasn't already being talked about. It was just that 2016 and 2017 seemed to be a launching point for a whole new wave of devotees, experiencers, and even a larger number of con men and straight up predators. Speaking of con men and predators, little did we know the person, literally the main speaker we had gone there to see, was one of the all-time worst ones to ever be unleashed upon our community, so-called, disclosure community. Here, I'm gonna very gently take you off the screen there. And that was a person by the name of Corey Good, which, a lot of us have heard the stories. We've all heard about that. I could probably write a book around my couple of years experience with that whole friend group and all that. But it was really the stage in which, we were first introduced to those things. At that stage, I was deeply obsessed with the information he was coming out with, because for a lot of us, it was the first time we had ever heard any of these things, not knowing it had been data mined and harvested from a host of online forums, stolen from other experiencers, and then willingly distorted later on, mind you, to fit his personal narrative or long-term disclosure cash grab business plan. Regardless of his true nature and the eventual revealing of his still ongoing scam, Corey had brought forth a number of things to our community that had a profound impact on myself and others. And I'll pause here to say, enough impact that he brought together a group of people that, seem to be active still to this very day within those channels or those areas, despite a lot of other people that had come and gone. And so, love him or hate him, he had a big effect on us. But anyway, let's keep going. Despite being hold on, I went a little too far. Despite being later exposed in a court of law as a true con man on many levels, he played an important role in helping a number of us understand many of these secret programs, breakaway civilizations, and off world events were real and actually happening. I stand by that claim today, despite all the public work I have undertaken to reveal and inform the public of his scam in the years since. And I'll pause there to say a lot of you guys don't know this, some of you do, but in 2020 I literally launched a whole channel. I mean, technically I took down most of the videos now, but we did this whole project with the people that had worked with Corey and talked about all the shit that he had done with people, which, whatever. I mean, that's like pretty much 6 years old now, and it's one of those things that I don't even give a shit about anymore. But at the time, it was a big deal, and it was kind of exciting, and it was an all-encompassing kind of chapter that I think a lot of people stay really stuck in. You know what I mean? A lot of people stayed really, really stuck in that. But anyway, let's get back to the story. That's just one little minor offshoot there. During that conference, I received my first ever energy clearing from Eric in a pop up camping trailer owned by our friend Derek in the downtime between speakers. It was about a 15-minute process of him placing his hands gently on a couple areas of my body and just moving invisible energy around. At one point, he stopped and explained I had some kind of energy wrapped around my neck and reaching down into my chest and my liver. I didn't know what to expect, but I gave him authorization to remove it. And within moments, I felt the sensation of that wind in my body from the year earlier rising with an incredible intensity, almost like a tornado forming. At that moment, I seemed to dissociate completely and came back into my body with tears streaming down my face. I felt a strange trembling inside, and all I could do was walk around the campground for the next day or so, going in and out of heavy sobs and rivers of tears that just poured out of me. If you haven't heard already, if you haven't noticed, that's a theme. That was a theme. That was a theme for that stage of my life. Um, and I did. I'd literally walk around for like 24 hours and I would pause. I'd be talking to people and just hanging out totally normally. And I would feel this weird trembling inside me. And I would like walk around the corner and just like, and I would like have this weird crying fit. And then I would like, I would like literally brush, myself off and then go back and like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm good. I mean, it was that weird. Um, anyway, it was as if a cork had popped inside me and something needed to pour out. I decided to allow it. And on that day, a certain wavelength of fear and doubt inside my body seemed to leave forever. It was one of the most profound healings I had ever had up until that point, and afterward he told me how I needed to start doing qigong if I wanted to make it any farther than I was now. He showed me a couple movements, and the rest was history. After returning home from that conference experience, I was changed once again. I began to look up various types of qigong online, and I just started to mimic what I saw other people doing. It's important to mention that in my mind, this was one of the single most important choices I ever made. I mean this very, very sincerely. If there has been one thing I have learned since the beginning of this path that has shown itself to be literally true, it is that energy body cultivation is often the greatest deciding factor for anyone who wishes to do energy work or learn to connect with non physical energies, spirits, whatever you want to call it. I often tell people this in my private sessions with clients. It doesn't matter if you don't believe what I say or agree with the way in which I work, but if there's one thing you pick up from me, let it be a decision to begin a daily practice of Qigong, or at the very least, some form of deliberate cultivation of the life force energy within you. When I began practicing Qigong, it was the first time since that initial crown chakra opening in which I was able to take control of and turn down the intensity of the energies I was experiencing inside my body. Up until that point, I had been at the mercy of whatever it was that was being felt or broadcasted around me: emotions, thought forms, technology, even, entities and astral parasites, quote unquote, if you want to go down that road. Very, very true. I had no control at all and no idea how to return myself to stillness or sovereignty. Despite feeling and perceiving so much in the non physical space, spending years working in a theta state, having internal conversations with people, all the stuff that I talked about in the beginning of the book when I had so much early stage, like success in learning how to, kind of reach out with the mind, regardless of all that, I had no idea. I had no idea how to make anything that I was experiencing at that stage of my life stop. I had grown, I had changed, but I had no idea how to, limit myself or really, still, and this is kind of outside of it, I'm commenting on it here. I think it was one of those first stages of a person's so-called quote unquote spiritual journey where I was realizing like I know nothing, literally nothing, absolutely nothing. You know what I mean? And the stories that I was being told from people and, watching on YouTube were meaningless at that stage. Let's keep going. There were many days in that period when the intensity of the human world seemed unbearable. I would drift in and out of fits of deep rage, self doubt, unworthiness, hatred, and frustration. When it would hit me, I would completely shut down for days. And when I started to practice Qigong, it was a defining moment for me because it was the first time I had the ability to make it stop. It also seemed to open up my dream space to an even greater degree, and all kinds of new experiences came flooding in. While the morning portal effect had stopped after only a few times, I'll pause there to mention, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, the morning portal effect is somewhat of a playful way of talking about how right in the early first couple weeks of this explosion of energy in the body, I would wake up and it was like I was watching myself and I was feeling at the same time. And I was like going through this portal, like just coming right out of the ceiling. You know what I mean? It wasn't a portal like a vertical one. It was like in the it was in the ceiling of our bedroom. And I just came out of this weird, it was like blue green shimmering, kind of liquid gateway sort of a thing. Anyway, it was a very, very strange experience. While the morning portal effect had stopped after only a few times, I still had multiple visitations, the feeling of something trying to enter my body upon waking. That is very real. I did have that. We can talk about that. If anyone wants to ask a question on that, we can go into it later. And even strange beings standing at the foot of my bed as I would open my eyes. I will comment on that actually. That was a very, that was one of those things that was like I really didn't know how to work that into the book other than just to say it as a sentence at the end of something. But there was, I mean, literally this period where it was like right as I wake up in the morning, I would open my eyes and there would be people standing at the foot of my bed. And it wasn't like aliens or like grays or like, reptilians or like, it wasn't even Jesus, you know what I mean? It wasn't a demon. It was just like for this literal split second, it would be like some man or woman from like the 1950s, a guy that looked like a farmer, you know what I mean? Or some shit like that. I'd say the most clearest one out of all those. And there was like I would say one day there was like almost like a homeless looking guy that was standing there for a second. There were, man, there was like just, yeah. Anyway, I'll tell you the most vivid one of all, absolutely most vivid one. I can still see them in my mind. I woke up one morning and standing at the foot of my bed were two people. They were like a couple. Maybe I even talked. I'm about to talk about this right now. Let me just read about it here because this one tripped me out because they just stood there for a while. Anyway, here I'm gonna go ahead and get back to the reading of this. One of the more memorable was what looked like an adult couple that appeared one morning right as I opened my eyes. They looked, get ready, like farmers from the 1800s or a much earlier time in history. A man and a woman, to be exact, and they had unusually large heads and extremely round, dark eyes. They were so vivid and clear. I actually thought they were physically real when I saw them just standing there at the foot of the bed. In hindsight, they seemed to know me somehow. I remember dwelling on it for days and telling no one. Nothing was wrong. It just made no sense. And I had been conditioned by shame, unfortunately, in my marriage to just not talk about any of that weird space shit anymore. But anyway, it's just a mere paragraph. But that was it was not like their faces were not like alien grays. When I say that they had big heads and like weird dark eyes, not like a traditional gray. I wouldn't even say that anyone would see these beings and say they were grays. It was just a different type of head. It was like a big round bulbous head, but not even totally unnatural. It was just like a very weird round boxy big ass human head, and their faces were kind of small, but their eyes were like very very big. So I would say in some way that the eyes were kind of grayish. Like when I say gray, I mean like a gray alien. And there's going to be a lot of very psychic and telepathic people that will watch this, and I promise you, you'll get a weird glimpse of it, and you'll be like, "What the hell?" It's like beings that didn't really fit in with any sort of narrative in somebody's sci-fi story. They were just weird, and they were wearing these old-fashioned clothing. I remember the male was wearing this kind of like a plaid shirt and it was like colors of blue, and like there was like this patchwork sort of like design on it. The woman had a sort of like a shawl. It was literally like they were wearing these old time outfits, and they're just standing there just watching. And I remember there was no fear. There wasn't like this like it was just like and then and then gone. And you're just like, it's like, what do you say about that? Who do you tell? You know what I mean? What are you like, hey, there was these weird looking old people standing in my bedroom this morning. You know what I mean? It's like, man, that one I remember. And it wasn't because there was violence. It wasn't because there was some crazy message. They didn't do one of those like, stop using nuclear weapons, save the environment. They didn't say shit. It was just so vivid. Those times, and I know there's people that are watching this that have had those out of body experiences or even within the physical world, and you perceive something that is more real than real. And that's a hard thing to grasp when you haven't experienced it. And I pray that everyone that watches this can have that experience. But it was like more real than real in a weird way. And it's just like, how? How? And there was, like, dirt. There was literally, like, dirt on them in this weird sort of like anyway, um, I'm sort of tripping out on one random part. Let's keep going. Anyway, yeah, here we go. So we're on page 49 for anyone of you that are following along. Shortly after the Mount Shasta SSP conference, I began to experience missing time. The most notable of which happened 2 nights in a row, which I'll pause there once again to say that was a cycle for me. There was never a things that would happen like just one, like just this one thing. It was always like it would happen once and I'd be like, "What the fuck?" And then like a couple days later, again, and it was always like a series. In this case, what I'm about to talk about, there's only 2 that I can recall. Maybe I assume there was others, but who knows? The most notable of which happened 2 nights in a row in which I physically, real life, physically in this body, not a out of body, not a dream, not a vision, not a meditation. I physically woke up standing in my underwear on the back step of our house in San Diego. A bright, round bulb of light seemed to pop just above me like a massive bubble. I noticed it trail upward in a wavering stream of light and disappear. I just wandered back into bed. And when it happened in the exact same way the very next night, I felt afraid. Why was I standing out there? What was that light? and that strange popping sound. In the days after that, the little sparks of light I would often see in the field of vision around me would go crazy. They would streak across the sky and swirl around in ways I had never seen before, and I even asked my wife at the time if she could see it. Of course, she didn't, though. In fact, no one I knew at the time other than me did. And I'll pause there again. Sorry to do so much like commentary on these, but I think it kind of gives us a unique option to do so. That I think for me really corresponded with a period of what some people would call MyLab experiences or some kind of abductions. I'll be real, I don't have any memory of what happened within those nights when I woke up out there. I really have no memory of like, I just got dropped off. Nothing, literally nothing to tell me that. In fact, it took me a while to begin to kind of piece that together. It was not my first like, "Oh, that's what it was. It was a ship picking me up." It was like I didn't even go there. I was just like, "Whoa, that's weird. I'm really embarrassed. What's happening?" And then I would just literally pass out once again. But um anyway, there was an additional comment I was going to make around that. Actually, yeah, that is one thing I would say. After that brief, kind of double evening experience, I noticed every night because I remember going outside at night and standing out on our porch and being like, "What was that? Was that real? Who was that? Is this really happening?" And I would look up in the sky, and that was a period of time when I could look up there in the night sky and I could just sit, and within seconds, there would be like things flying by and like objects, and I was like, "Wait, not airplanes, maybe just, visual hallucinations of something going on within the mind, or maybe it was me having had some sort of a filter removed and I was able to perceive, just movement of, multidimensional beings or energy or craft." But I remember sitting outside on my back porch one night and this massive light came just cruising right over our house. And I remember grabbing my wife at the time and I was like, "Look, look." I was literally doing that. "Look, look, look. Do you see it? There it is. Oh my God. That's what I'm telling you about." And it was one of those like, "What? There's nothing there." You know that moment where you're trying to tell someone and they're like, "I'm sorry." And you feel that sort of shame. And you feel that shame and you're like, "What? And it's just like something like, "Boo," you know what I mean? It's like, oh man, but there was so much activity and like I'd say it kind of continued maybe for a couple weeks after that. In hindsight, later on, we learned that those type of events do take place when we have a legitimate multidimensional experience, energy kicks up, but I still don't know what it was, but some people claim it was me getting dropped off by some type of ET or government spacecraft. Some of you will cringe upon reading that, and I'm okay with it. I might have even just been sleepwalking in the end. It's entirely possible, by the way. Although I never sleptwalk in my life. It really doesn't matter, but I know I'm not the only one who's experienced such a phenomenon, and it needs to be stated because once again, I had no idea what was about to show up next. During that summer of 2016, the only thing I could do aside from meditate, and you guys have heard this next part a million times if you listen to this channel, but in 2016, the only thing I could do aside from meditate, here it comes, was stand in that little spot near the fence in my backyard where I saw that lion's face in the sky and do qigong. It was the only thing keeping me sane. My marriage was coming apart. My job seemed meaningless. I had very little connection to the physical world anymore, which was not a good thing, mind you. Even the spiritual groups I was a part of seemed to be fading away as I kept speeding towards something. But what? But what is the question? That was right. Or I'm going to read a little bit more and then we're going to pause for questions. But the next portion is actually very, very important. I think, Anyway, it's self-explanatory. That was right around the time one person in particular came forward in my life. A woman by the name of Britton Dodge. And I will pause right there and say that's straight up her real name. So I'm sorry, Britton, you're out there and I blasted your real name on my live stream. That's straight up her real name. I changed every other person's name in this book except for this person's name. She was one of the first professional psychics I had met in this life, and the one person out of everyone and everything I had experienced in 39 years on Earth that truly handed me the keys to an entirely new chapter in my life. In fact, in looking back on everything I had been through and experienced, it was all only training me for the impact she was about to have on me. We had been vague Facebook friends for a couple of years, seemingly by accident, and were both part of yet another meditation group I had dabbled with here and there. It was an ET contact meditation group, but to be honest, there wasn't much contact going on with the people involved other than with their own egos, which a lot of us have seen that trend, right? After one group in particular, she seemed to randomly send me a message stating she was a professional psychic who had encountered a number of forms of ET life and offered to help me get better at making contact. The truth is, I completely ignored her message, not for any good reason. I just wasn't focused and stuck in my own head. In February of 2017, I attended the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles, California. For those of you guys that don't know, Conscious Life Expo is a really big kind of spiritual conference. Takes place on this huge hotel out there in LA. It's a very interesting, cool, massive place to be. It's kind of gotten larger and smaller and larger again over the years. And around that stage, it was absolutely massive. And so in 2017, I attended the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles, California. By some strange stroke of synchronicity, she ended up there too, amongst a small group of people who had been friends online, but were just meeting in person for the first time. You guys know how that is, right? For those of you guys that have done the I'm meeting people from the internet phase, in your life, and you're like, oh, you're so and so. Oh, yeah, you're so and so, and you kind of like, meet a group of people from the internet and you realize quickly which ones are weirdos and which ones are not. And it was kind of, one of those stages. Um, but by some strange stroke of synchronicity, she ended up there too amongst a small group of people who had been friends online but were just meeting in person for the first time. There were a number of us, but none of them matter now other than what happened with Britain. On that day in particular, I was standing in the lobby of the LAX Hilton amongst a group of acquaintances, just randomly chatting about whatever was going on. Britain came walking up and introduced herself to everyone very quickly. She was about 5'2" with dark, curly hair and looked to be in her late 40s. She was wearing some massive white faux fur coat and just looked like a complete alien amongst all the people who were there trying to make contact with that very thing. There was something about how she looked at people that reminded me of Sharadama, but also completely unique in her own way. Very quickly, we got to talking, and to be honest, I had no idea what it was I was saying, but she suddenly looked at me with a fierce determination, and in front of everyone, suddenly blurted out something like, you're a psychic. I immediately blushed and said, like, huh? What? Like literally doing that and scrunching up my face incredulously. Yes, you are. You're a psychic. That's why you're so weird. Let me show you something. I didn't know how to react, but I could tell she knew something. She just oozed with some kind of unknown natural mysticism that I had honestly never run into before. And let me tell you, I had run into a lot of weird shit in the 2 years prior to that moment. Very, very sincerely. Britton took me over to a couch in the lobby, sat down, and pulled out a piece of paper from her purse. She claimed she had worked as a professional psychic for well over a decade and had taught many people. She decided to give me a test on the spot she called the paper test. She claimed it was taught to her by her guides at an earlier stage of the journey and allowed her to read a person's energy in order to understand what was going on with them. It involved taking a small white piece of paper and cutting it into a strip long enough to wrap around your finger. On the strip of paper, she would write the name of a person and their birthday, if available, and then wrap it around her index finger like a ring. She would sit there with it for a moment or two and then wrap it around her next finger, then the next one, and so on. Britton claimed that each finger held the energy of an element: earth, air, fire, water, and ether. By taking a person's name or birth date and feeling into the elemental qualities of it, she was able to discern seemingly impossible amounts of actually relevant data, or excuse me, relevant information about a person. How were they doing? What were they feeling? What kind of emotions and tendencies did they have? She could even describe blockages or issues they were dealing with. It absolutely blew my mind as I watched her demonstrate with a couple of the women who were present in the moment. And after a few minutes, she said, "Okay, your turn," which kind of freaked me out, to be really, really honest with you. And I will pause there to kind of comment on this. It was like a whirlwind. It was like some random weird alien person entered my life in this sort of cyclone of strange mystical energy and kind of swept everything up. And like, just one of those people. It was very much like a scene from a movie, which sounds very cheesy to some people. And yet, we live those scenes in our daily lives day after day. It's why, humankind makes movies out of them. But um, anyway, so, after a few minutes, she said, "Okay, your turn." The first time I used Britton's paper technique, I was so nervous and afraid of getting it wrong that I just completely guessed at what I was feeling. I don't even remember the name or birth date she wrote on the paper or what I said about them. It was like a Hail Mary pass or just a total shot in the dark. And when I stopped talking, she just smiled and said, "I knew it. I told you you were psychic." At this point, I need to pause and emphasize something because it is in great part one of the primary themes of this entire book you are reading now, or rather listening to. In that moment, something happened to me that fundamentally altered the entire course of my life forever. I pray that every single person who is reading or hearing this will get to have such an experience in this life. The experience of being seen by another and acknowledged as being real in some way. I had never received such a deep confirmation of something inside me until that very moment. And the absolute truth is, I do not believe I would be sitting here writing these words right now had that not have taken place in my life. For some reason, at that very moment, I decided to believe her. I don't know how or why. It was as if something inside me said, "Yes, I am," for the first time in some deeply cosmic way that no words can accurately describe. In that one little moment sitting in the lobby of the LAX Hilton, she had given me permission to be an entirely new version of myself, one that had been coming together piece by broken piece over the past 40 years of my life. In truth, a part of my soul had already known this for a long time, but I never had a chance to see an actual example of what the real thing looked like. And all the other examples I had seen up until that point were so false and paltry, yet full of ego, that I couldn't relate with anything they were saying. In Britton's case, it was painfully obvious to everyone around her that she was a real psychic. It oozed from every pore and was both exciting yet also troubling in some way, because you could see how out of place she was as well, even amongst all those, star seeds and spiritual seekers in an environment like Conscious Life Expo. Such is the burden for truly authentic beings, such as herself. You end up being painfully separate from everyone, yet right there the whole time, often completely unseen and ignored by the sleeping masses. In some cases, it can be equal parts a blessing and a curse, because the more in tune you are with the frequency of truth, the more people who have never known what it actually feels like will second guess and devalue your ideas because it doesn't fit in a box that looks and smells like all the other surface level bullshit that their previous programming takes as real. In some cases, they won't even acknowledge your ideas until a person with a higher follower count or more social media value tells them the exact same thing, Often years later, after you publicly proclaim the very same ideas to seemingly deaf ears, they won't have come to the same conclusions as you because they are not on the same level, and it has nothing to do with better or worse, bad or good. It's just that the reality is we are not all created equal, and it was by design. Some people are more naturally inclined to connect with the non physical realms, spirits, and the ever present frequencies of psychic data that's available to all, and some are more naturally inclined to other things that people like me have no idea about and never will. I say this all the time, but it's just like when you were in school in the old days. I do say this all the time. A lot of you guys have heard me say this. Some kids were really good at sports. Others were naturally gifted in math, science, or whatever. And then there's those like me, and probably you on some level as well, those of you guys that are watching this, who are naturally gifted in understanding psychic energy. But the problem is there is no social infrastructure present to acknowledge those gifts and help people understand that they are something real. So we second guess ourselves, lose our way, and get tossed around by the maelstrom of 3D human life, right? Some some of us get addicted, some of us go mad, others get abused, some even turn to the dark side to try to feel their own power, not knowing the truth and beauty they would be capable of if only one person had really seen them and said, "Hey, maybe you're not crazy. Maybe you're psychic." Britain was a living example of the real deal, a true psychic, intuitive, shaman, priestess, or whatever it was she called herself. And because I could see how painfully authentic she was in her identity, it gave me just enough faith in myself to believe that it was all real and that I really was a psychic. After that day, we began to speak regularly. She would check in on me, give me advice, talk things through with me about what I was perceiving in my head. And in all reality, I believe she was sent by Spirit to prepare me for the next phase of my life, which was about to kick off in a way I could never have imagined. She was not without her issues, though. I could see very clearly she had been plagued by years of her own abuses, social exclusion, depression, a host of autoimmune issues that are often common to people with extremely open energy fields. She hadn't exactly been on a winning streak in her own life either, and despite being fully self supporting in her psychic practice, she was clearly battling with her own series of demons. Over the following months, we spoke nearly every day. She became a motivator and a cheerleader in my life that I had never had before. It was like she was passing something on to me, and neither of us realized it until it was nearly over. In looking back, I think I offered her a source of energy that renewed something inside her. Months later, I noticed how she had begun to physically heal and regenerate in unexpected ways. You would have never thought it was possible, but we both watched it happening, and I know if she were to read this, she would know exactly of what I am speaking. It was like new blood and new life returned to her body, and for me, a certain type of meaning and deeply buried knowledge seemed to appear out of nowhere. We'll pause right there for questions or comments, but I always give gratitude to the people that got me started in doing this. And she was definitely the one that sort of kicked off this journey for me. But let me see if you guys have any questions before we keep going forward. We're going to try to end it just a little bit past an hour and a half. But anyway, I'm going to look for the comments that say question first. Let me know if you guys have questions. If you already asked one, you can copy paste it at the bottom of the screen, and I'll get back to it in a moment. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, everybody. You can greatly aid me by clicking the like button for today's broadcast. Here we go. Here's a question. What's up, Robin Lane? Would you recommend visiting Mount Shasta? I've heard it's a very active place. Yeah, definitely. I think it's an amazing place. I think if you haven't been there, I think it's a place that is worthy of some form of like what's the word? I'll probably stutter when I say it. Pilgrimage. There we go. We got it. Because I think a lot of people will sort of connect with it at some point in the human journey, if you're able to, and it's a thing that feels relevant to you. But it is a highly mystical place. You can literally walk through the entirety of that mountain. Like you can just walk all over it, like all over the place. And Mount Shasta as a town is right next to it, which is also an interesting place. It's like it's kind of stuck in like limited consciousness in a sense. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just you'll just see it. It's sort of limited in its own way, but also deeply unique. And honestly, Shasta is a great place. I highly, highly recommend it. I think you will probably have a number of just strange, mystical, synchronistic experiences. Some people have really huge ones there. Some people, as we've heard, will literally, dematerialize into the mountain and, as they say, go down into what is it? Is it Telos? That's underneath Mount Shasta, or I don't know. To me, it just feels like the inner earth. I don't know that I need to define it, you know, like with a name or anything, but anyway, here we go. What's up, Ramy? Thank you for using all caps. It's very noticeable. Ramy says, Matt, maybe the boxy head humans were ETs in disguise as humans. Yeah. That's also my kind of generalized understanding. But at that stage of my life, just being totally authentic, at that stage, I had that was not the thing I was thinking, which is odd given that I had, gone to that conference that year. It was the first one that I had gone to. And, it was like I was immersed in all that. But I think there was a lot of false kind of just bullshit that was cast upon people within the disclosure and ET contact kind of friend group that I was a part of at that time. And it was I was not equating what was happening with me as being anything relating to ET stuff at that point yet. Well, I mean, later on that changed because I was being told by, I think, jealous, kind of shitty, competitive people that it could only be real if it was filtered through a certain type of experience. It's only real if it happens this way. If it happens that way, you're just having a dream. You're just having an experience that your higher self gives you, right? There was a lot of kind of limited programming around that admittedly at that stage of my life, I was taking it in because I didn't know any better. So I was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? That's not what it is. That's not alien. That's just me because because I really want it to be, so I'm creating it." You know what I mean? Which is a weird one because that is also holds a lot of truth within its own way, but it was almost like within the sort of friend groups and the sort of just factions that I started out in this, it was that true contact was only a privileged thing that was given to those that were a part of some government program. You know, that's just the vibe. That's how it was. Nowadays, we'll look at that and we're like, okay, and let me guess, you're in Kruger too, right? Or whatever the cool guy name is, right? The dangerous space program guys, right? You know what I mean? It's like nowadays we're like, but at that time, it was very different. I think it shows us how much we grow in this journey, when you come to realize how many things that you've been taught or were placed in front of you were literal bullshit. Some of us would call that a consciousness gateway, which ultimately looking back on my experience with, the sort of social group that rose up around Corey Good in that stage, I see it truly as what we would call a consciousness gateway, a stage of one's life in which many things are expanded and built upon, discoveries are made, corners are turned, transformations are experienced. And some people stay in that gateway. It becomes a way of life. It becomes a definition of who and what they are. It almost becomes like a personality trait for them. And then other people continue to grow and change and shift, and they move past it into new stages. And all of those could be equally illusionary as the initial ones, but each of them teaches something about ourselves and kind of who we've been and who we are and who we're becoming. And so I look back on that period as just a consciousness gateway that a lot of people go through. I think that that Sphere Being Alliance early stage journey was a big consciousness gateway for a lot of other people, just like the Michael Salla, material. I'll just say in general, a lot of Michael Salla's material is just pure drivel. And I think that that's part of the journey because we're meant to be able to like look at it and build discernment and realize what's real and what's not real, just like the Ashtar command scene for a while, another one where it's like, you realize later on, oh, they're all symbolic of also stages of the human journey of like, soul development that we go through. And so, you know, it was a consciousness gateway for me, but anyway, I could go on and on and on about that one, but um, anyway, feel free if you guys have any other questions. We're going to try to keep this a reasonable time period here. I'm thinking I might read forward to just close out this one little section here. I think we are. Actually, maybe we won't. Let's take a vote in the chat. If you guys want me to read the next little section, it's about 2 pages. We can do that, or we can return back next week because I know I've been reading at you for like an hour and a half now. Thanks for staying with our weirdo book club. But anyway, Nothing Defined says, at least I didn't say it first to Michael Salla. Yeah, I know. I kind of love Michael Salla. I unironically love Michael Salla, not for the reasons you would think, because he's so devoted and fearlessly sticks to this path of like mostly delusionary bullshit. There's also a few really good things and good people that he connects with here and there, but by and large, the majority of what he puts out is a perfect example of a consciousness gateway. Absolute perfect example of it. Because as you build discernment, as you grow, as you heal, as you change yourself, you inevitably look at certain things and you're like, oh my God, where you're like, a couple years ago, I thought that was real type thing. You know what I mean? Which, once again, that's the stage that we're in right now, you guys. So be on lookout for those things in your life that you see right now. And you're like, oh my God, now I realize that's what it was. You know what I mean? And, so I think is that an effect of Neptune leaving retrograde? I think it is. You guys know I'm the least astrological psychic in the world, but anyway, that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion on it. Missing Time says, I'd go surfing with Salla. You know what, Missing Time? That's funny you were saying. That's funny you should say that because I came to this realization the other day. It's like an epiphany. And I was like, you know what, man? If there's one thing that the disclosure community really needs right now, really needs bad, that can make a huge difference. If there's one thing, it's obviously another secret space program documentary, right? That's exactly what we need, right? Yeah. Yeah. It's anyway, we're gonna okay. Yeah. We will pause it there for the day. I don't see anyone saying to keep reading. Maybe somebody said it, but we're gonna come back in a week. We're gonna come back in a week and keep going. But I do really like Michael Salla. I'm not joking. But I mean that also in kind of like from the perspective of when I say, my favorite character in Family Guy is Roger the Alien. Or no, American Dad. My favorite character is Roger the Alien. It's like I see these people as characters on a TV show that we're all living and we're all watching unfold. And I don't mean to focus in on him because there's a million people that are so much worse. Elena Denon is a perfect example of it. And it's weird because if you look at her now, she looks like she's like deteriorating physically. You can see it. And it's like, like whoa. At a certain point, the parasite turns on its host and begins to rapidly deplete life force essence. And unless you have a system in place to continue to restore it, like we were talking about earlier in our reading, we eventually deplete ourselves, and at a certain point, you become a mere shadow or parody of the self, we could say. But honestly, they feel like characters to me. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Some people would be like, "Oh, you don't take anything seriously." Well, I am neither joking nor serious, but a secret third thing, which will be revealed later. It's a surprise tool that we'll use later. Anyway, let me know if you guys have any other questions before we roll out of here for the day. Yeah, for those of you guys that have not, you can help me greatly by subscribing to this channel. Although I think about 3/4 of our viewership is made up of subscribers, so that's probably everyone that's here today. If you want to give me the illusion of my channel growing, you can immediately unsubscribe and then resubscribe yourself right now. And then, I'll be like, yay. you know, no, I'm totally joking. But anyway, Aurora Diamond Heart says, we need the SSP mockumentary. I thought somebody was making one right now, weren't they? Anyway. Missing Time says, I love American Dad. Totally. I haven't watched either of them for a while, but they were some of the last shows I was watching before I lost my ability to watch any shows at all. So they're like the only fragments of recent popular, television media that I can draw from. I mean, I'm not saying I haven't seen anything else. I just haven't. Almost never watch anything anymore. Not to say that's good or bad. I just can't. Thank you, Sally Forth. Thank you. Oh, Aurora Diamond Heart says everyone said keep reading. Oh, okay. Sorry. I missed that part. I'm scrolling too wildly through the chat. We'll be back next week, I promise. It'll be anticlimactic now if I jump back in. And let's face it, the shorter I make these little sessions here, the greater the chance that we might actually get seen by more people in the YouTube world. Although I will say, I want to give it up to Aurora Diamond Heart for recommending the Opus AI program because it actually worked, and it seems to, create some cool clips for you. That's one thing that I think is sorely missing from this channel. It's like 99.9% ultra long form content, which, I guess it's good if you're into that, right? If you're into that. What on earth is there to take seriously? I don't know anymore at this point. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Oh, Holland Sass can't stand Family Guy. That's okay. I couldn't at first either. When I first saw it, I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. And then this is a dumb story to close with, and then I remember that year I went on tour for like a month straight, and we had a little mini TV in our van when we were on this tour, and one of the guys had a box set of the first 4 seasons of Family Guy. And so I had never watched it until like season 5 or 6 or something, but he had a box set of the first 4 seasons of Family Guy, and I was driving most of the time or sitting in the front of the van, but I actually listened to it for like a month straight, and I was like, and during that time, I hardly watched it at all. I just sat in the van and listened to Family Guy, and I was like, holy shit, this is the greatest show ever. But I also think it was because I was a captive audience, like in a weird way. You know what I mean? And also, let's be real, that was 2004, 2005, 6, something like that. So that was 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Missing Time says, I can't stand Family Guy. That's okay. I can't now. Now it's just like weird woke dog shit. Let's just be real. Let's just be real. It's like totally woke. Seth MacFarlane, I don't know if he got cloned, if he got droned. I don't know if if he got bought out by that one country. I don't, I don't know, but it's like he feels dead. You know what I mean? I can also tell how he's like diluted a lot of the voices over the years. Like they kind of like sort of fall off a little bit. But that happens with everyone because if you listen to the first few seasons of SpongeBob and you listen to the later seasons of SpongeBob, the voice is completely different. And it's the same guy the whole time. It was the same voice for SpongeBob the entire time, but a completely different voice in the beginning. But anyway, we opened it up to all kinds of randomness at the end. But the truth is, I don't watch any of those shows now, and I'm not even saying that as some kind of like woke cool person. Like I would love to be able to just watch TV. I would say the only semi-normal thing that I do in front of a TV screen, you guys, is play video games, which is a real thing that I do a lot of, and I have no shame in that whatsoever. So, which will be a conversation for another time because I know that's like 0.01% of people that watch this channel are gamers. So, that one will definitely get some people to unsubscribe. But so I still do maintain, you know, somewhat of a semi-destructive watching schedule, kind of like how some, you know what I mean? Like those days when you could literally watch TV like 24 hours a day, a part of me does miss that. Not that it's a good thing for anybody, but you know what I mean? Where it's almost becomes like a person in the room, which is sad, right? It's kind of like kind of depressing. But then you guys know how it is. That's how it was for me as a kid. But anyway, Missing Time says I can't play games anymore. That's okay. I go through periods where I can't at all, where I couldn't for years. I just not at all. I couldn't even look at it. And then all of a sudden, randomly, I'm like, okay, now boom, a switch will flick, and I'm like, I'm gonna play Battlefield 6 for the next 36 hours straight. Or now it's like this. Anyway, I won't even go into it. There's a whole other timeline there waiting to be discussed. But anyway, thanks for hanging out, everybody. We are just past 1 hour and 35 minutes. Thank you for hanging out for our book reading. We're going to be back next week, picking up from page 56. Don't let me forget it. I better fold the page right now. We'll be back in 1 week for the next episode of this probably extremely long-winded journey that will take far too many months. But I appreciate you guys hanging out. It's been a good one, and we'll be back. We'll be back. So, wow, the end stream button is a totally different color. I almost got like totally distracted. Some of you guys will notice that I was like hunting around for like, where is it? I love it when, like StreamYard or Zoom updates itself because it's like, I don't know if you're like me, but I'm such a creature of habit. I'll be like, it's, it's, it's not there. And then I'm like, oh, it's right there. Anyway, stay out of trouble. Boom.